It was a beautiful, quiet day. The city shimmered in the sunlight that gently brushed against the windows. A girl sat on the rooftops of the sunlit buildings. Sadly, for her, that sunlight was nothing more than something physical. Her life had long been swallowed by darkness. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages kept flooding in, pulling her away from her thoughts. Every single message she got carried words sharp enough to kill something inside a person if they were weak enough. But one message stood out. A solution. An invitation to end everything. No need to solve problems, just disappear. And they disappear too. She grabbed her phone, found the number saved as My Little Kangxia, and dialed it. Tears welled up in her eyes the moment she picked up the phone. And they didn't stop. Not even as she made the call. The girl she was calling was caught in a heated argument, accused of seducing someone's brother. She kept saying she didn't know anything, hadn't done anything. She explained she had to leave. She had a life or death situation. One of the girls, her face hidden behind a mask, shoved a phone in her face, claiming she had proof. She recognized herself in the photo, but nothing they were saying was true. She hadn't done a thing. The girl nearly pushed the phone against her face, insisting the photo showed they knew each other. She said, "Everyone knows Bai Jiho, but that doesn't mean he knows me. He was just a regular at their pastry shop. That's it." She explained everything she really knew, and she really did have to go. But people like them never let go that easily. You don't even have to cross their path to make them angry. Meanwhile, the red-haired girl left a voice message saying, "That's it. I'm tired of everything." At some point, the girl managed to escape from those people. She ran, hoping she wasn't too late. She called Jiame, but for some reason, she wouldn't pick up anymore. That scared her even more. She didn't understand what she was doing wrong. She just prayed her friend wouldn't do anything reckless. But every step the red-haired girl took matched the terrifying thoughts racing through her friend's head. And no matter how hard she tried, you can't outrun fate. It had all been set in motion long ago. Jiame never picked up, so all she could do was pray she'd wait for her. And then, in what was probably the worst second of her life, she saw a human body falling from above. She froze on the spot while people around her started panicking, screaming in horror. Someone had just jumped. She stood there alone, paralyzed. The terror everyone else felt couldn't compare to what consumed her from the inside. Her knees nearly gave out when she dared to look down. Yes, it was a horrible mess down there. But even in that broken, ruined state, she recognized the face of the one who had fallen. People rushed around, yelling for an ambulance, shouting to call the hospital. But the girl knew. It was too late. At some point, she overheard a conversation. Someone mentioned that intimate photos of a girl had been leaked a long time ago. 3 men were haggling over how much one of them would pay for those files. And then one of them, with a sly grin, said he regretted that she was dead because she had been too pretty. The moment he said that, a glass of water hit him right in the face. It was hot, scalding. He instantly recoiled in pain. Then he started yelling at the girl in front of him, asking if she'd lost her mind. And maybe that question hit her right in the soul. She hadn't expected to hear something like that. Not after the tragedy she'd just witnessed. Just recently, she'd seen her friend's lifeless body, watched her fall with her own eyes, and now she was seeing intimate photos of her, alive. She grabbed the phone from another man's hand and bolted forward at full speed. She ran until one of them grabbed her by the hoodie, yanking her hair. Qiangxia fell face first, but instead of shielding herself, she held onto the phone, determined to do what she came to do. They chased her down. One man grabbed her shirt, yelling for the others to take the phone away from her. One of them even kicked her, but she didn't give up. Her fingers flew across the screen. People around them started shouting, calling security. The crowd screamed at the 3 men to let her go. They could have beaten her to death just for that phone. But she stopped feeling anything they did to her. She finally found the videos in the gallery, and deleted them. Only then did she finally let herself breathe. Sure, those videos were probably still out there somewhere, but it was her small victory. A couple of security guards showed up, warning the men to back off. They eventually took the phone back, but decided not to mess with her further, realizing the videos were already gone. Probably Jiame's friend. After everything she'd just done, she didn't even want to get up anymore. She stayed with security for a while, but they let her go since the men didn't file a report. As she walked outside, the moonlight shone brightly through the window. Her only friend left, quietly wrapping her in its calm glow. Then she dragged herself up to the rooftop, to the only friend she had left. Her feet led her straight to the place where GMA had jumped before, the place that had taken her friend away. It was hard to believe something like that could really happen. She leaned over the edge as if expecting to see something other than the height itself. And then she immediately thought about how terrified Jiame must have been. She felt so sorry. Sorry she wasn't fast enough. In a desperate moment, the girl began to pray, begging God to let her change what had happened, to fix it somehow. She truly hoped some higher power would come to her aid, give her the chance to protect Jiame. But it was too late. All she could do now was cry, alone. But she wasn't left alone for long. Suddenly she felt it, and heard it. Someone was behind her. The sadness that had wrapped around her soul quickly turned into fear, spreading from her heart through her entire body. And that fear was justified. The moon wasn't her only friend that night. There was a man with wings, a terrifying one. But she wasn't so paralyzed that she couldn't speak. She managed to ask who the hell he was. The question was ignored. The demon just stared at her, floating closer and closer. And the way he looked at her, it terrified her to the core. There was a dreadful aura surrounding him. And even though she had called to God, it was the man who asked why she'd suddenly decided to summon him. She said it then. It was Bai Ziho. She recognized him. She knew him. The moment the demon appeared, a memory flashed through her mind. A story her mother used to tell her when she was little. It was about a couple who had just gotten married, dreaming of building a real family with a child of their own. They wanted their love to give them something tangible, something they could hold and raise together with care. But sometimes in life, when you want something too much, it slips further away. No matter how they tried, they couldn't have a child. And then, a young, strikingly handsome man appeared. He looked more frightening than he acted. He introduced himself as a demon, one who comes when someone desires something too strongly. Any wish, no matter how big or small, he could grant it in just seconds. But nothing comes for free. When you want something badly enough, there's always a price to pay. And they wanted that child so much. They didn't even think twice before agreeing. Her mother had paused there. The little girl had eagerly asked what happened next. Did they get their baby? Her mom stroked her hair gently and said the baby they had was truly beautiful. But the girl didn't understand what they had given in exchange. Her mother only answered with a question. Can a deal with the devil ever bring anything good? Now that same demon was slowly descending, getting closer and closer to her. And when his feet finally touched solid ground, it felt like the world itself shook. That's how heavy his presence was. But now she wasn't afraid anymore. She recognized him as the man whose face shone from posters almost every day. The fear disappeared. She lowered her head and said he was the one to blame. Bai Jiho was the reason her friend died. Those teens had attacked and held her down because they believed she knew Bai Jiho, their brother. If they hadn't smashed her phone battery and kept her there, maybe her friend would still be alive. Maybe she would have made it in time. The demon didn't understand what she was even talking about or why she suddenly burst into tears. What exactly was he guilty of? He came because she called him. And now she was not only accusing him and crying, but also charging at him with her fists. I mean, come on. That takes either serious courage or pure stupidity. Charging at a demon who just descended from the sky. Not that it scared him. What kind of threat could this fragile human girl really pose? Stopping her would take no effort at all. A single wave of his hand, and she was up in the air. She struggled, flailed, shouted no kaya, demanded that he let her go. He explained that he was here to grant her wish. Was she sure she just wanted to throw all her anger at him? She could ask for something else, something truly valuable. She froze at that. A real wish? A valuable one? But she was still furious, mostly at herself, though she hadn't admitted it yet. Then, thinking about his words, she realized maybe he wasn't wrong. This was a once-in-a-lifetime chance. And even though he was a demon, she exhaled and reminded herself that, for now, he hadn't actually hurt her. The man saw her finally calm down. A sly smile spread across his face as he motioned her to come closer with his finger. She flew toward him fast, and in that moment he felt it. A burning desire for vengeance inside her. She steadied herself and explained. Tiangxia, her friend, someone had filmed her naked. Those videos spread through the entire company. She said with emotion that her friend had been the victim. Sviksya and Livsil, but everyone called her a slut and tore her apart emotionally. In the end, she couldn't take the pressure anymore and ended her own life. So now, this girl wanted revenge for her. The devil smiled cunningly and asked, "And what are you willing to pay for a wish like that?" He admitted even he didn't quite know what she could possibly offer to satisfy him. And without that, nothing could happen. So after lowering her to the ground, he turned to leave. Or rather, to make her desire burn even stronger. But the girl had just been handed the perfect opportunity. She couldn't let him go that easily. He was her only hope for revenge. Realizing this was her last chance, she screamed that she was ready to give herself up in exchange for that wish. She repeated it 3 times, that she was ready to give her life, her body, and her soul to make that wish come true. The demon laughed, saying her life had no value to him. She wasn't interesting at all. Although, he changed his mind quickly, remembering how she had tried to hit him. No one had dared to do that in 100 years. So maybe she was interesting after all. So he leaned down toward the girl and said he'd grant her wish after all. Then he reached out and touched the center of her forehead with the tip of his nail. Whether it was from hysteria or that single touch, her body suddenly weakened. Her eyelids grew heavy and began to close. Deep down, she felt it. Her wish had been granted. The demon in front of her blurred, almost unreal, like a dream. A few seconds later, she collapsed straight into his arms, no longer in control of her body. The moon, the friend she thought she had, silently witnessed the demon sealing a terrifying deal with the girl. Now, she belonged to him completely. He spread his wings, wrapping them around her. He gently tilted her head to the side, lowered his mouth to her neck, and his fangs glimmered, catching the moonlight. The next morning, waking up was hard and foggy. Mornings like that always are. The first thing she saw was the demon she thought she'd only seen in a dream. Remembering everything that had happened, her body jolted awake in an instant. Her eyes fell on the photograph beside her bed. Was everything that happened last night actually real? Or maybe it was just a dream? No, seriously. Could what she experienced really be real? Then it hit her. How could superstar Bai Ji-ho possibly be a demon? It must have just been some stress-fueled dream. But that didn't change the fact that she woke up in a horrible mood. After everything that happened, how could it not be? Oh, and to make it worse, she was still in the same clothes she'd worn yesterday. How had she even made it home? Her gaze suddenly caught the mirror in front of her, and what she saw there made her entire body tremble. She rushed to the mirror, hoping it was just her imagination. Weird things happen after you wake up, right? But no, she wasn't imagining it. There was clearly a bite mark on her neck, like the ones vampires leave in movies. And even though she'd been out cold, she remembered feeling those teeth sinking into her skin that night. Her racing thoughts were interrupted by her phone, ringing and vibrating nonstop, so annoying. She decided to check it, to see what was going on, who was texting, what kind of news was making it buzz like that. The group chat from the company that had leaked her friend's video was blowing up. Everyone was panicking about a shutdown, saying their kids wouldn't have anything to eat. The news said one of the biggest companies had suddenly gone bankrupt overnight, leaving thousands jobless. The girl knew there was no way a company could collapse like that overnight. This was clearly the devil's doing. Then it hit her. Thousands of people had lost their jobs because of her wish. So it really was Bai Ji-ho. How the hell could something this insane actually happen? It felt like she was trapped in a manga. At that exact moment when she had cursed him, he'd been in an important office, handling something serious. And somehow she'd managed to interrupt him, at the worst possible time. Wow, what timing. He hadn't even had a chance to relax properly, just barely flushed the toilet. While the girl was lost in her thoughts, a soft tapping came from the window. And the second she turned her head toward it, she froze in shock. Standing outside her window was Bai Ji-ho himself, smiling and asking why she'd called him so early. He also took the chance to glance around the place and came to the obvious conclusion. Her apartment was tiny. The girl pointed at the TV and yelled, "What the hell is going on here? How am I supposed to make sense of this?" He reminded her of the wish and said he'd fulfilled it. But she wasn't happy. Too many innocent people had lost their jobs. She shouted, asking why he hadn't thought about the consequences before doing all this. He calmly explained that everything has consequences. The girl screamed for him to turn back time, or something like that, right now, immediately. And the demon agreed. A bit calmer now, she explained that she wanted revenge on the bad guys, but without hurting the innocent. The demon listened and said that could be arranged. He actually seemed to understand her. Suddenly his eyes changed, and everything around them began to shift. Not just something, everything. Time itself rewound to the previous night, erasing the entire day from history in mere seconds. Even the clock went crazy, its hands spinning backward for the first time ever. She looked down at her phone, and there it was. No news about the company's collapse. Wow. She finally realized he could really do anything. And he confirmed her thoughts in his own words, saying that yes, in fact, he can do anything she might wish for. But he'd lied. The girl immediately caught on and asked if he could turn back time far enough so that her friend would still be alive, and she could save her. Why did we say he'd lied? Because the moment that question left her lips, he lowered his head slightly, falling silent. She clung to that idea like it was her last hope. Something that shouldn't have existed, yet by some miracle, bam, it did. He let out a heavy sigh and admitted that even demons, like all other beings, must follow certain laws. Laws that can't be broken. The girl lowered her head, disappointed, but deep down she understood that for balance to exist, rules must too. The demon didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the framed photo standing next to her bed. He recognized both girls in that photo. After all, her friend had also once made a wish that he protect Chengxia. The girl worked at a company called Wanhee Group, the same place where they'd once worked side by side. As she walked through the usual crowd at the entrance, the kind you'd always see in a big company, she overheard people talking about her friend's death, and it broke her even more. Her best friend had already become nothing more than a dull topic of gossip, tossed into the past like trash. People said they'd talked to her sometimes, that she'd seemed fun, and then they mentioned the leaked videos. God, what a disappointment. Tianxia dragged herself from the marketing department to finance to collect her friend's things, because she wouldn't be doing it herself anymore. A man pointed to the empty spot where GMA used to sit and said she was late. The cleaning lady had already taken care of it that morning. The girl froze. What do you mean, taking care of it? The incident happened just yesterday. Yesterday. Not even a funeral yet. Yame's belongings had been thrown out the very next morning, without honoring even the smallest part of her memory. How could they? She couldn't take it anymore. Through her stress and anger, Qiangxia shouted that her friend's things weren't toxic. She'd worked here for 3 years. Didn't she deserve at least a shred of respect after her death? The man didn't like her tone and said he hadn't ordered anything like that. It wasn't his fault. Besides, he added, no one in the office would want to come to work and see the belongings of a dead colleague. It's awkward, he said. Just as she was about to leave, the man muttered something under his breath, calling her friend a whore and saying her friends must be the same. She heard him. She stopped so abruptly, the box in her hand slipped and fell. He'd struck a nerve. Chengxia would have swung at him with her fists, thrown a few choice words his way. But a hand on her shoulder stopped her. It belonged to a woman. Serious, calm. She said the girl could discuss this with her somewhere quieter. It was Han Xintian, who clearly didn't want drama to disrupt the company's work. She explained that the man had just used the wrong words. No one had thrown the things away. She personally wouldn't have allowed that. She led the girl to a room where, she said, all of GMA's belongings were being stored, so she could collect them in peace. And so the girl found herself in a room full of boxes, but she immediately recognized which one was hers. Slowly, she walked toward it. It felt familiar. She knelt down to open it. The moment she looked inside, a bittersweet smile appeared on her face. Her friend was always so gentle and so naive. There were no dull, gray office things inside. Everything was cute and colorful, like it belonged to a child. She recognized every single thing in there, so her hand instinctively reached for the photo. It was a picture of the two of them, Changxia and Jimei, laughing, smiling, making silly faces like little kids. She began scolding the girl in the photo, telling her off for standing there smiling, while Tianxia was left to survive here alone. She couldn't hold back anymore. Tears flowed. Why was Jimei always so stubborn? She hadn't listened again and disappeared. The girl promised she would take everything, these pieces of her, home. She wouldn't let anyone else touch them. Meanwhile, the man we know as the demon, and in their world, a superstar, sat unusually still while the makeup artist worked on him. Out of nowhere, he asked the artist if he'd give up his life for a close friend. The answer was a flat no, and the demon understood. That was normal. What he didn't understand was why the girl would go that far. Obviously, any normal person would have refused, so the verdict was simple. Changxia was a little not normal. The girl remembered the day she first met her friend. A group of kids was bullying her. They shouted that no one should touch her because she was sick and contagious, but that didn't stop them from yanking her hair. Hard. One boy yelled to another that now he was infected too because he'd touched her, and they'd better wash it off fast. They turned her pain into a little cruel play, laughing loudly. Kids can be monsters sometimes. Their laughter only brought more tears to the girl who would later become our protagonist. Who could blame her? And then, a small, funny-looking little girl stood up to them. She yelled that they had no right to act that way. She even threatened them. She knew they were from Class B, and she said she'd tell their teacher everything. Their laughter died immediately. They mumbled something about just joking around, being bored. But clearly, in her own little way, she'd scared them off. They turned tail and ran. Idiots. The brave little girl exhaled like she'd just spent hours digging potatoes, not chasing away bullies. Then she came closer to the crying girl and softly asked if she was okay, because she had seen the tears in her eyes. That's when Changxia finally realized. The girl in front of her was just as scared as she was. No wonder she let out such a heavy sigh, and that made her feel even worse. The situation was already awkward. She'd stayed quiet, someone had stood up for her. But it wasn't some strong, fearless person. It was a girl who simply wanted to help. Later, she walked with her and complained that her new friend was 3 years younger, yet so much taller. How was that even fair? She said it was a problem because everyone would think she was the younger one, Sarah, but she wasn't. She was supposed to help and be like an older sister. She decided she'd protect her new friend from those guys, because honestly, Qiangxia had been such a little crybaby back then, it almost made you feel bad for her. Qiangxia crossed her arms over her chest, turned away proudly, and said she definitely wasn't a crybaby. None of them had taken their words too seriously back then. They didn't even realize how true they would become years later. That day was supposed to be perfect. They met, waved at each other, only a few steps between them. Jiamei stood there smiling, holding a trophy and a bouquet, calling her friend to hurry over. Changxia had missed her so much. Without thinking twice, she stepped forward to cross the street. And that's when the car came, with a drunk, driver behind the wheel. What the hell made that bastard get in the car wasted? Changxia still had her earbuds in. Why didn't she think about that? Jiamei tried to yell to her. Changxia finally noticed something was wrong. Her friend's terrified face gave it away, but it was too late. That's when Jaime kept her childhood promise. She pushed the girl out of the way and took the hit herself. Qiangxia was thrown aside but barely hurt, just a few scratches on her arms. She used to scroll through the news about her friend's achievements, but that accident destroyed everything. Jiamei's career was gone in an instant. Qiangxia got lost in her memories, blaming herself again, not even noticing how the coffee overflowed. A coworker turned off the machine. He asked why she was just standing there. The coffee was spilling everywhere. She hadn't even heard him walk in, so she bumped into him, apologized, and realized it was Xingnan. He was the deputy head of HR, Lu Xingnan. He didn't get mad, just asked what had distracted her so much. She mumbled something about being tired, but he said he knew. That wasn't it. The girl was clearly off because she missed her friend. He said he was really sorry. He'd known Jiamei well. She was a wonderful person. The real monster was the one who leaked those photos. He even asked who she'd been living with at the time. How did he know about her relationship if Jiamei said it was a secret? Not even Qiangxia knew. Her friend said her boyfriend didn't want their relationship to go public, so she'd never met him. Xingnan said that if he'd accepted her invitation earlier, maybe she would have been safe. She wouldn't have met that jerk. He said he genuinely felt sorry and even a little guilty about what had happened. He told her Jiamei was the most attractive girl he'd ever known. Qiangxia ended the conversation, saying if there was nothing important, she'd get back to work. But he stopped her again, putting a hand on her shoulder and calling her name. He said he'd heard the girl had no parents, so Qiangxia had handled the funeral alone. If she ever needed help, she could come to him. Changxia thanked him. Even if it was just words, it still felt like support. Who knew if it was real or fake? But even so, she hadn't heard words like that in a long time after Jiamei's death. While she was talking to someone, suddenly everyone around her started buzzing like a hive and rushed somewhere. She figured if that many people, especially girls, were running to look at something, it had to be a celebrity. She stopped a coworker and asked what was going on. Turns out Bai Jiho had arrived. The girls were thrilled. Hearing the name that had become way too familiar lately, she almost stuttered. What was he doing here? One of the girls grabbed her by the wrist, saying they had to hurry to get a good spot. Turned out they meant a spot closer to the window. The girls were excited. The guys were rolling their eyes, clearly jealous. The girls said they thought he was heavily photoshopped, but nope, he was just as elegant in real life. So slim, the girls said. Nah, just skinny, the guys grumbled. They were obviously just jealous. Changxia, though, was the only one annoyed by his arrival. She'd told him not to show up like this in public. And as if reading her mind, he tilted his damn head up, right toward where she was standing, and waved. Her face twisted in frustration. Oh no, not this. Why wave? Why make it obvious they knew each other? And then he even tried to say something to her, but it was hard to make out from just his lips. Yes, Tian Qiangxia had made a deal with the devil to avenge her beloved friend who now rested in peace. His human disguise? Superstar Bai Jiho. And if he looked like a young, handsome man, don't be fooled. He was over 1,000 years old. After living with this deal for a few days, she'd already learned 3 rules. First, if she thought about him, he would appear. Second, if she asked him for something, she'd have to give something in return. And those bite marks didn't fade for at least a week. Third, she only had around 3 months left to live. Human energy was limited, and according to him, if he bit her again, she wouldn't even last those 3 months. He added his number to her phone, telling her not to call for little things, as if she were some kind of fangirl. But he thought getting his number was a privilege. Bottom line, she made one clear conclusion: don't make deals with the devil. She overheard from the employees that now that Devil was going to be the new model for their cosmetics line. He even wanted to collaborate with the company long-term. All those whispers were interrupted by the sudden ding of the elevator arriving, and her coworkers' wild excitement, like an elevator was something magical. Some of them probably lost their voices when they saw the elevator wasn't empty. Their superstar was inside. In front of Bai Jiho stood a huge bodyguard in a formal suit with a scar on his face, radiating that classic, come any closer and I'll eat you alive energy. The second Bai Jiho saw Qiangxia, a grin appeared on his face. Without anyone noticing, he snapped his fingers. And then everyone around just froze. Their movement stopped, voices fell silent, cameras went dark, people stopped pushing. She spun around. God, not again. Why did he have to freeze everyone like this? He looked at her and said that since he already stopped everyone, she might as well hurry up and come to him. No one would push her now. And what else could she do? This demon always did whatever he wanted. You couldn't make him stop. But honestly, it was super uncomfortable when he froze everyone like that. Worse than the noise and shoving. Once they were alone in the elevator, the girl tiredly asked if he was going to take that frozen time from her lifespan too. Smiling, he said, "Of course. It's included in your bill, ugh. Why was it always like this?" Qiangxia just couldn't figure him out. She reminded him that he didn't need to come here while she was gathering information. The demon explained he was here only for business, some cooperation matters, then asked if she had any leads yet. She answered that yes, she had a list of suspects. It had to be someone she saw often. First on the list was Jiamei's boss. Her friend had often complained that woman only made things worse. Second was a man from her department. Jiamei had said he used to torment her, emotionally. And then there was Lu Jingnan, someone she trusted and wanted to be close to. When you like someone, your guard drops. But she didn't say that part out loud. She just pressed her finger to her lips, lost in thought again. While she was zoning out, the man suddenly leaned in and asked what conclusion she'd reached. It jolted her like an electric shock. She stepped back and told him not to lean in on her like that so suddenly. Making a face, the demon asked how she could think about another man when he was standing right there. And then, at the same time, they both called each other weird creatures. He decided to lecture her, telling her never to trust men, especially the handsome ones, because they're all liars. When she asked if that rule applied to him too, he actually paused and thought about it. Then he said, "I'm a demon. I have no reason to lie. I can create anything I want." After a short silence, he glanced at the mirror, then at her, and said her name. He suddenly asked why she always looked like she wanted someone to scare her or talk to her harshly. "No problem?" He suddenly started acting more like a real demon, saying she wasn't worthy of being one of his people. He said she'd surely seen those dramas where girls heading into battle change their attitude and appearance because their soul craves the fight. The demon said he wanted to see more confidence in her. Then, unexpectedly, he kissed her on the forehead. She had no idea why he suddenly decided to do that. What was the reason behind it? A few seconds later, she felt her body ignite, like a fire growing inside her. When the man finally unfroze everyone, they all looked confused, like they'd felt something shift but couldn't tell what. The bodyguard had completely lost track of the superstar again. How did he always disappear like a ghost? Meanwhile, inside the elevator, the man was very pleased with himself. He said he'd done a good job and she should thank him. Pointing to the mirror, he said she'd only see the change there. So she did. And honestly, she was stunned at how much she'd changed in just a minute. That forehead kiss from the demon had done it. She grabbed the spot he'd kissed like he'd punched her and asked if he really had to kiss her. He reminded her she was the one who asked him to stop biting her neck, so he thought of a new way. She, of course, tried to protest, but it was useless. He wasn't listening. And anyway, they'd already arrived. As soon as the elevator doors opened, a crowd of people and cameras appeared in front of them. He didn't let her pass, stepping forward and telling her to stay behind him. She agreed, but silently. She wondered how people could like the devil so much. They had no idea who he really was. But the crowd shouted so loudly about how much they loved him and how perfect he was, she realized. Even if they knew, they'd still be obsessed. Among the cheers, he caught a few stray thoughts about her. She's cute. Oh, right, from the advertising department. And that girl's friend who died. She probably learned how to seduce men from her friend. He was surprised by that and asked how she'd managed to ruin her reputation with everyone like that. Since Changxia didn't quite get what he meant, he offered to let her hear those thoughts herself, using his powers. But she said she wasn't going to waste her time on trash like that. She didn't care about any of them. Instead of worrying about people she wouldn't even see much longer, she had an investigation to focus on. Later, the man left, telling her to make sure she bought him candy, but a very specific kind since he was allergic to all the others. Wait, seriously? If someone told you a demon liked candy but was allergic to some, would you believe it? While she was struggling with the vending machine, she suddenly heard a creaking noise from the side. The sound came from a man watching her through the small window in the door. And damn, he was lurking there so creepily that when she noticed him, she jumped. Even the candy dropped. What was even stranger was that he suddenly flinched too, then bolted. The girl ran after him. She rushed through the door and shouted for him to stop immediately. The guy froze, completely startled. He had no idea what he'd done to make her chase him like some kind of criminal. Unbelievably, she must have sensed something, because she caught up to him lightning fast and grabbed his arm. She yelled at him, asking why, if he heard her calling, the hell did he keep running? He mumbled something under his breath about just passing by and her going nuts out of nowhere. When she got a closer look at his face, she suddenly realized she'd seen him before. Yeah, definitely. She'd caught him several times talking with her friend. In a firm tone, she said he was that guy who worked in the same department as Jiamei. The girl demanded to know if he had any idea what could have happened to her friend that made her take her own life. The man immediately said asking that was pointless. Even if he knew something, it wouldn't bring her friend back. A shiver ran through her. Finally, she'd found a thread to pull on. This man knew something, damn it! She grabbed his shirt and said he was right. Jiamei was gone. But it happened because someone pushed her to the edge. So if he knew anything, he had to tell her. She was determined to find whoever spread those photos and get revenge. But the man hesitated. He wasn't sure if he could trust this girl. He said she probably didn't have anyone backing her up. She was powerless and might drag him down with her. Then the girl let go of him, hesitated for a moment, and then remembered the demon. Lifting her chin proudly, she said he was wrong if he thought she was alone, because she wasn't. The man exhaled with relief, almost as if believing he'd be safe if he told her the truth. He admitted that what he knew might not be as useful as she imagined. He said the story went way back. It started when the girl first came there. From the first day, he liked her. But someone like him had no chance, so all he could do was watch. He tried to justify his stalking, saying he just wanted her to be happy. But the truth was, says, he was in love, just watching from afar. He told her that after some time, Xingnan showed up. And since Qiangxia was Jiamei's friend, she must have known him. The man said Jiamei should have been happy, But then Xingnan rejected her and broke her heart. He said he thought all her problems came from that heartbreak. But one day, overhearing their argument, he noticed she stopped going to the restroom on the 12th floor, where they all worked. And it wasn't just that she avoided it. She warned other girls not to go there too. Changxia was surprised to hear this. The man said it was really strange. And not long after that, Jiamei was gone. That's when the girls started to wonder what could have been in that restroom that Jiamei was trying to hide. Meanwhile, the man was sitting at that boring conference. After so many years, he was used to how dull Earth could be. But he still hated it. He heard people talking but didn't listen. He was just doodling on a piece of paper. He drew Qiangxia, or more like a creepy parody of her. He labeled it Weird Female Monster. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed something going on nearby. So, bored with his sketching, he glanced that way. He saw a few familiar faces and immediately got curious about what they were talking about so excitedly. Since he had abilities humans didn't, he sharpened his hearing to eavesdrop. Weird Female Monster handed something to the guard for the demon, saying she had things to do. First, she told him to come see her after the conference and gave him a piece of candy. When he asked her name, she said to pass it on from Tian Chengxia. It seemed to piss him off how long she was talking to the guard. Why? Hard to say. So he decided to interrupt their little exchange with what he thought was a funny prank. The guard had just opened his mouth to say something to her. Then suddenly his mouth snapped shut. He couldn't open it, just let out a muffled, The girl was stunned and the guard looked totally confused. Instantly, Tian Qiangxia guessed it was the demon's doing, so she looked at him, wondering what the hell he'd just done. The moment she looked his way, the man just smiled sweetly like he was innocent and waved at her. But she only glanced for a moment, then quickly walked away, probably not even seeing his little hello. Wow, the nerve of her! She just ignored him like some stray dog. That's not how this works. He typed her name a few times and sent a goofy emoji that basically screamed, "Yeah, you! I'm talking to you." No, seriously. She didn't even bother to reply. She saw the message right away and still ignored it. Meanwhile, the guy giving the presentation was supposed to ask him if he liked everything so far. But he was so consumed with the fact that she wasn't replying that he started ignoring the conference himself. He was literally biting his nail, fuming over being ignored like that. An awkward silence fell around them. They were talking to him, but now he was the one ignoring everyone. The host took his silence as him hesitating about the collaboration. That's when Bai Jiho finally snapped out of it, saying no more new plans. Just do whatever they already had in mind. He added he had just one condition, and everyone immediately perked up, ready to agree to anything. They were willing to make the impossible possible, but what he wanted was Tan Tianjia as his assistant. That's it. The room instantly buzzed. People started talking over each other, asking who this girl even was and if anyone knew her. One guy said she was the new recruit in his department and that maybe Bai Jiho should pick someone more experienced. Others agreed, saying an assistant needed to be smart and experienced in the field. But Bai Jiho said he wasn't interested in anyone else. She was the only one he wanted. Meanwhile, that very girl, instead of working, found a repair in progress sign somewhere. She placed it in front of the restroom door and quietly slipped inside. At first glance, everything looked normal. Clean, spacious, just a regular restroom. But somewhere in this ordinary restroom was the thing that had terrified Jiamei. She started checking the stalls, trying to imagine what could have scared a woman away from using the ladies' room. And then it hit her. Hidden cameras. That had to be it. So, with that thought, she began searching for anything odd that could be hiding a camera. But if she was right, where the hell would you even hide one here? Nothing seemed unusual. She checked everywhere, even in places no one in their right mind would put a camera. And eventually she started to think maybe she'd been wrong. I mean, she'd looked everywhere. She would have found it. But then something odd caught her attention when she grabbed the handle of one stall door. It didn't seem suspicious at first, but the lock wouldn't open. Jammed or something. The guard Bai Jiho had sent turned beet red as he walked into the women's restroom carrying tools. He clearly wanted to leave as fast as possible, but the girl grabbed his arm and said he had to help. She apologized for the trouble, but asked if he could help her get the lock open. But apparently, besides tools, he had a message to deliver. From Bai Jiho himself. He mimicked Jiho's expression and said he wasn't some errand boy who could just be ignored. Then he hissed at her to reply to him. And after work, she'd better go with him and never ignore him again. After stunning her with that, the guard calmly put his glasses back on and said he was ready to help. The girl was so taken aback by the whole thing that she just froze for a second. But then, after laying out the tools, they got to work. It didn't take long. The man quickly found a hidden camera inside the door. He said there was no memory card in it and it looked pretty damaged. And recently, too. Chiangxia thought that if someone had left the camera without a card, then anyone who knew about it could come back and insert one. Even the guard got pissed, saying a hidden camera here was disgusting. But something didn't add up for the girl. If the person who took the card planned to replace it, they would have done it right away. Why risk showing up multiple times? Which meant someone else had found the camera first and took the card. The girl eventually let the guard go, sincerely thanking him for his help. A few other female employees from the department walked by, complaining that this restroom was always under repair. So Chiangxia joined in the conversation, asking when they last fixed it. The girls remembered it was probably after the incident with that girl from the finance department. They said the police had shown up back then, and that's when the repairs happened. She thanked them genuinely. And just like that, she appeared out of nowhere, asked questions, then left so fast it left them surprised. The girl remembered. That was exactly when the demon had shown up too. And honestly, the big question now was, where the hell was that man? So when she felt her phone buzzing, she finally pulled it out to check what was going on. Baijiho seemed pissed about something again, but she figured he was probably just being dramatic. Seriously, why throw a fit when she literally just texted that she'd found new evidence? She even tried to explain, to share with him that she'd actually found something. But he didn't come. Instead, he told her she should call him Great Devil. So she said, fine, whatever, and told him to meet her later by the back exit. She'd already been waiting a few minutes. It was chilly. The wind was really picking up. And then the so-called Great Devil, if it was really him, finally showed up. He knocked to get her attention since she'd clearly zoned out, and she turned the light on. In that smug, satisfied voice of his, he said she must have really missed him. The girl turned away and asked if he'd learned to read minds now. He said even if he could read minds, hers were impossible to understand. She was way too weird. The girl suddenly froze after hearing that, then turned back to face him. Smiling, she said she was ready to hear what Great Devil had to say about how weird she was. After that, a thick, heavy silence settled between them. He didn't say anything for a while. Honestly, he had no idea what to tell her. He was kinda hoping for a distraction. He even admitted to himself that she'd just looked delicious. Like, I could bite her? Kind of delicious. And by the look on her face, she totally got the message. She started walking toward the door and told him to follow her. A few minutes later, they were both standing in front of the women's restroom on the 12th floor. He got annoyed, saying she probably smelled something weird in there and dragged him over. Seriously? She calmly showed him the camera and said she'd found it here. She wasn't sure if it was tied to her friend, but she felt it was connected to those leaked photos. She explained that the memory card was missing. No clue who had taken it. She told him everything so that, knowing this, the demon could help her find something related to it. She added that if he could figure out who took the card, it would change everything, even if her friend had been involved. He dramatically looked around and said, well, I don't see any cameras here I can rewind to find the culprit. She replied that's exactly why she called him. She even bought candy for backup. He honestly couldn't imagine how this girl always managed to pull things like this off. Strawberry candy, by the way, his favorite. He turned his head away, like a cat pretending it doesn't care, and asked if she wanted him to take the camera and look into the past. She didn't even know how to put it into words. But yeah, that's exactly what she wanted. He said sure, he could do that, but her payment was way too small. A couple of candies? Really? Then she tugged her shirt down a little, exposing part of her neck, like saying, go on, knock yourself out. That was so unexpected that his face and ears went red instantly. He even covered up with his cap. But hey, she offered, and it would have been rude to refuse a lady. So he began shifting into his true form. She honestly didn't expect him to just transform without warning. And the world around him started to distort. Everything twisted, stretched, and changed. Even the whites of his eyes turned dark, eerie, inhuman. And honestly, for the girl, it wasn't the prettiest sight. A demon's a demon. Seeing something like that in real life is terrifying, no matter how you spin it. When the transformation finally ended, he reached out for the camera, just like he said he would. She handed it to him carefully, placing it into his palm. And the second she did, everything around them began to shift again, like a silent explosion was about to swallow the room. Baijiho stared at the object, thinking about how to look into what had happened before. And then the darkness swallowed him whole. He plunged into the past. Everything around him began to lose its shape, twisting and reverting to what it once was. People, places, events. It all fell back into its previous form, showing him how it all began. It felt like the whole world had flipped backward just for him. And someone sitting in front of a panoramic window watching the changes said his name. The man, whose face was still unknown to us, called Baijiho a real piece of work. Meanwhile, the glass in his hand was floating above his palm. Oh yeah, this was someone interesting. That day at the office had started out perfectly normal. A few girls were annoyed about the meeting because they'd missed lunch, while others were busy prepping. And the two we're focused on were just casually walking down the hallway. But then one of them suddenly stopped and jerked like she'd just run into something. She waved her hand, saying she could definitely feel she'd touched something, but her friend just laughed and said being crazy wasn't a reason to skip the meeting. Turns out she'd bumped right into the demon. Well, more like his wing. He decided he'd make sure to complain to Kyangxia later about an injury on the job. So it was decided he'd better hide them. After all, there were a lot of people around. Honestly, it was more convenient to stay in human form anyway, so he just concealed everything. Glancing at his watch, he realized things were probably about to start soon. He needed to find the girl. Behind him, he heard someone call out to Jiame, telling her she was headed the wrong way because the conference room was in the other direction. That's how he found Jiame. She told the girls, who were already getting worried about her, that she'd join them soon. And only he knew she was lying. Of course, she wasn't coming back. She was just a few meters away, so he rushed after her, wanting a closer look. Honestly, he thought, she looked even better in real life than in the photos. But not better than his Kyangxia. He suddenly overtook her and stepped in front of her, blocking her path, though invisible to her eyes. Using his demonic power, he warned her that if she did this now, someone would be very upset. But his magic didn't work, she just walked right through him. And yeah, he'd heard the saying, not even the devil can stop someone determined to die. But he hadn't expected to witness it like this. Just how serious must it be if she couldn't even feel his presence? He would have followed her to the very end, but someone suddenly called out to the girl from behind. Han Xinqian told Jiame to stay close to her during the meeting. But Jiame, she knew she wouldn't be staying close to anyone. She wouldn't be there at all. Her look was heavy, like a hammer. She apologized to her boss, saying she'd rather rest a bit. The woman said there was no need for so many apologies. She was starting to feel awkward already. But of course, she allowed her to rest. Though honestly, no one needed to give her permission for the kind of rest she meant. The woman was already turning to leave, so she wouldn't be late. But GMA called out to her. At that sound, not just one pair of eyes turned around, but two. Then GMA, wearing a particularly sad expression, asked if the boss knew those people. And even though she didn't say their names, the woman's face showed she knew exactly who she meant. With pain in her voice, Jiame asked why the woman had kept everything secret, why she hadn't tried to warn them, to protect them. She wanted to say that if the woman had helped her from the very beginning, but the words caught in her throat. Her chest ached and she couldn't say a thing. Her eyes spoke for her. The demon understood. He finished her sentence in his head. If the woman had helped, Jiame might have found another way. One that didn't lead here. The woman was clearly shaken. Her hand tightened around the door handle. She started to say something, reaching for whatever she had in her pocket, but Jiame stopped her. Smiling softly, Jiame said she'd remember her boss as a good person. Han Xinqian froze inside when she realized what was happening. So that's the rest she was talking about. In her hand, she clutched the memory card she'd been planning to give back. And silently, without saying another word, she watched that gentle girl walk away. The air grew heavy and thick. It screamed that tragedy was just around the corner, that nothing could be changed. And the demon saw it too, how GMA literally disappeared into thin air. He already knew what happened to her next. Since he couldn't change how the events played out, all he could do now was watch. God, it was hard. To understand how a woman could see death in front of her and still not try to save her. Honestly, he thought humans were worse than demons. So contradictory. They lie to themselves. Next, he was near Han Xinqian again. She was standing by the panoramic window, watching the chaos and the death that could have been avoided. The girl's lifeless body, The screams from everywhere. She jumped from the rooftop. The woman trembled and burst into tears. And the demon didn't even look at her. It was hard for him to understand these strange creatures. Humans. He'd lived through more than one lifetime here, long enough to draw his conclusions. Way more than one. Why the hell do they do such terrible things? Why is there more darkness in them than light? Why do they kill the good and good people? Walking past the chaos, the man approached a strange figure. All covered up, masked, watching. It was a man. He lifted his phone and said in a cold, emotionless tone that the girl was gone. Meanwhile, Tan Tianxia was already tired of waiting. 30 minutes had passed. Where the hell was he? And just as she turned her back to the hallway, a chill ran down her spine. She felt something was off and looked back. Was someone actually there? In the end, she decided it was probably just some kind of overwork. She just needed to rest. Right then, nearby, she finally felt that something was happening. She saw that Bai Jiho had returned, though he was wobbling like crazy. At some point, he stopped wobbling and toppled forward. That is, he started falling. Of course, the girl caught him, but she had to support him with her own body. Heavy as hell. She asked what had happened to the demon. Had he fought someone or maybe gotten hurt? The demon complained that he was tired, since he'd used up a lot of energy, so now he just needed sugar in him. She was about to call him every bad word she knew for that stunt, but Jihu asked her to just sit there. Well, what else could she do but stay put? Might as well let him hug her. During the hug, the girl noticed that the demon was completely cold and asked why. He replied that, after all, he was a demon, not a human. And why did people always find something to criticize him about? After standing there a little longer, they decided it was time to go. Someone might see them. While Chiangxia devoured the delicious food they brought, there was a pile of sugar packets in front of the demon. He looked extremely sleepy while licking the remnants of sugar from the first packet. The girl, eating her food, glanced at him and asked if he wanted to try some, since it was tasty. And he got mad again. He said he could only eat sugar because he was allergic to everything else. Red rashes, diarrhea. Way worse. Actually, he could easily turn back into a bloodthirsty demon and drink her blood. The girl just laughed, saying it was funny to think of a demon having allergies. Since she called him Great Devil, he immediately protested, saying he'd changed his mind about her calling him that. She noticed he'd already eaten a lot of sugar, so she asked if it might be too much for him. He explained that traveling back in time used up a lot of energy, so he needed lots of sugar and a bit of time to recover his strength. He said that until he recovered, he couldn't use his powers, so the girl shouldn't even try to call him. He wouldn't come. Chiangxia apologized for this. Taking advantage of the situation, he hinted that he needed rest and care from now on, and if he kept pushing himself... The girl, forgetting that he wasn't even human but a demon, worriedly asked what would happen then. He stuck out his tongue and said he didn't really know. He'd never really pushed himself that hard before. So the girl decided it was finally time to discuss why they were sitting there. What had he seen? And Bai Jiho told her everything, not leaving out a single detail. He had worked hard for this. In fact, after his story, very little became clear. It seemed like she had just stumbled onto even more questions. She said that there were more questions than answers, and the demon advised her to get Han Xinqian talking. Once she opened up, they'd get a lot of answers. The girl agreed. They really did need to get her to talk to find the answers. In her mind, she was very grateful to the demon, though the price for all this had already been paid. And since he was exhausted, it was time for him to rest and go home. It was already deep night when the girl finally returned home. Even though she hadn't traveled through time like Bai Jiho, she was still tired. A long, hard day. She kicked off her shoes and went, as usual, to put her things away, not yet knowing about the unexpected guest. A few minutes later, she trudged to the bathroom to wash her hands after being outside. All as usual. Looking in the mirror, she saw a lady utterly exhausted from the day. Overall, she looked worn down by life. And life's tricks didn't stop. Her peripheral vision picked something up. Surely, life wanted her to have a heart attack because someone was behind the curtain. She understood that running out in a panic would be extremely stupid. She kept washing her hands, pretending not to see anything. She washed them carefully, trying at the same time to calm herself down. Yes, everything's fine. Gotta pull it together. She was still scared, of course, but had to act like everything was normal to get out of there alive. Luckily, her phone was right by the bathroom exit. The first thing she did was turn on the recorder. That would be direct proof if she couldn't escape. She pretended to be talking on the phone, saying someone had come by her house to have dinner together. The guest was waiting. She tried to simulate a real conversation, saying she wanted to sleep, but the imaginary interlocutor insisted and she reluctantly agreed. She was already near the exit, grabbed the handle, and said she was coming out, would be there in a minute. The girl had devised a brilliant plan with this conversation and was closer to escape than anyone else who had been in such a situation. But since she was focused more on escaping, she didn't calculate everything. Just as she approached the door, she had to run. She felt him behind her. He was the one who slammed the door shut. The man said people usually don't show up to meetings barefoot. She was so frozen with fear that many things gave her away. And it seems she wasn't afraid for nothing. That man immediately grabbed her hair and pulled her back. And he didn't just pull her, he threw her to the ground so hard she hit it pretty badly. Luckily, her phone flew under the couch at that very second, right where you couldn't see it. She screamed and squirmed, begging him to let her go, to not hurt her, and the recorder kept capturing everything. The man was twice her size and way stronger, so he dragged her across the floor like a rag doll. Because she was yelling so loudly, he covered her mouth with his hand, cutting off her breathing too. To shut her up, he struck her again, this time hard enough to draw blood. As she hit the floor, she mentally shouted out to Bai Ji-ho. Maybe he could help? But since he'd warned her he couldn't come, he didn't appear, while the stranger pressed her head to the floor. That's when she noticed her phone under the couch, still recording everything. The man said he'd lift his hand off her head so she could breathe, but only if she promised not to scream again. She nodded as best she could, agreeing just to take that breath. He did what he promised, and she finally inhaled. That gulp of fresh air was worth its weight in gold. She immediately said she didn't know who he was or what he wanted, but he could take whatever he wanted as long as he left her alive. He didn't even listen. He immediately asked where the thing was without even clarifying what he meant. She said she didn't know what he was talking about, but he struck her in the spine and said he knew. She was looking for that thing. When she didn't answer, he grabbed her by the hair again, pulling her along. Then he lifted her up by her shirt, holding her over his head, raised his other hand to strike, and asked again where the thing was. But suddenly, a ringtone sounded. Someone was calling him, so he just dropped her to grab the phone. He told someone that the girl had come back early, but he still hadn't found that thing. He said he had everything under control. The girl had no idea what he was talking about or who he was speaking to, but she felt it had something to do with her friend and the investigation she was currently running. The man said luck was on his side, then picked up a photo from the shelf showing Chiangxia and Jiame together. He grabbed her hair, showed her the photo, and warned her never to meddle in other people's business again, especially, as he said, not to meddle in the affairs of those who were no longer alive. Because if she did, she'd end up just like them. Then he delivered one final blow, tossing her to the side. It was so hard that she passed out, only coming to when someone started pounding on the door like crazy. A second later, the door was broken down, but thankfully it was Bai Ji-ho's bodyguard, not someone else. Seeing the girl on the ground, the bodyguard panicked and shouted her name. He ran over and helped her up, and she explained that someone had broken in and brutally beaten her. Her head was spinning like crazy. Everything hurt, and the bodyguard asked if she remembered what he looked like. Instead, she asked how he had gotten here. It was simple. Bai Ji-ho had a bad feeling and sent him. Oh, right. She remembered she had mentally called Bai Ji-ho, hoping he would come. She also remembered that her phone with the recorder was under the couch. The bodyguard was extremely surprised that she had suddenly fallen to the floor and started searching for something. Holding the phone in her hand, she said that even though she didn't remember his appearance, she had solid proof. 15 minutes later, they were at the police station. The girl told everything, got her wounds treated, and was promised they'd catch the culprit. The officer said she couldn't go home yet, so they could take her to the girl in the photo. She tried to explain that it wasn't necessary and that she just wanted to go home, but she was interrupted. The bodyguard came with the phone, from which Bai Ji-ho was shouting, asking how she was and why she wasn't at his place yet. The bodyguard muted the phone and said that, basically, the guy wanted her brought to him immediately. And she, calmly smiling, agreed to go to Bai Ji-ho. While the demon was sitting at home, he just couldn't find a moment of peace. Why had she been gone so long? Could something have happened to her again? Besides, it was still unclear how serious the wound on her forehead was. He decided that if it left a scar, it would be absolutely horrifying. Of course, he could have intervened and fixed everything. So it was decided. The moment she arrived, the first thing he'd do was examine her carefully. So, when the doorbell rang and announced that the awaited guest had arrived, he jumped to his feet, shouting that the door was technically already open. Still, before they even stepped inside the apartment, Bai Jiho ran ahead and opened the door for them, surprising the guard with his abruptness. The first thing he noticed was the bandage on the girl's forehead. He commented that she had taken way too long and then, as if speaking more to himself than to her, asked how she was feeling. How was her head? Any other injuries? The girl finally interrupted his monologue. Smiling, she said she was fine, and she really did look okay. It seemed like the man let out a sigh of relief. Her smile probably convinced him. She didn't look too worried. Then he finally invited her into the apartment, speaking as if she had been deliberately lingering outside. Not him. Tan Xia asked why the guard hadn't come in too, but it turned out he would arrive later. Bai Jiho reminded her that he wasn't exactly human, so there was nothing to fear. The first thing that caught her eye was the huge painting of the man, right in the middle of the apartment. Incredible. Bai Jiho immediately approached her and said she'd be sleeping in the living room, where his photo hung on the wall so he'd be nearby even at night. Nothing to fear when a man with a face like his was guarding you. After hearing that, the girl seriously considered turning back, but Jihu reminded her that he hadn't forgotten how to read minds yet. Next, he tossed her a package with the things she needed, letting her know where the bathroom and her room were. Looking at the things in front of her, she was impressed that he had even taken care of such details. Jihu, still reading her thoughts, told her she shouldn't be so sensitive, and she snapped at him for it. How long was he going to snoop in her mind? A little later, Qiangxia went to the shower, wearily letting her head rest under the warm water. It had been a long day. She just wanted to wash it all away. Touching the bandage, she felt a jolt of shock. Could something like this really have happened to her? What worried her more was whether her friend had felt just as weak and helpless when she was attacked. Since the girl stayed in the bathroom for a while, Jihu yelled that if she didn't come out soon, he'd throw all the food in the trash. It'd get cold. Of course, this was his way of caring for her emotional state. Mind reading hadn't been canceled, after all. He had decided he would never forgive whoever had harmed her. Later, after she ate, the girl went to her room, leaving him alone with the TV. But he got distracted, looking up and asking if she needed anything. It turned out he sensed her presence before she even spoke. Surprised by his bluntness, she admitted that she actually did need something from him. When she came down, he patted the couch next to him, inviting her to sit, and immediately reminded her that he had sent her to sleep and regain her strength, yet she was still wandering around. Settling into the spot he indicated, she said she couldn't sleep in such a big apartment and just twisted around on the bed. The man took that to mean she was going to try sleeping there and said he'd turn off the lights. But she stopped him immediately, saying the light could stay on. Still, a few minutes later, she finally lay down, curling up like a shrimp. Then she turned to him. After thinking for a moment, the girl said that when she had been attacked, she had screamed his name out of desperation. Jihu looked at her more seriously and admitted that he had felt and heard her cry out. Then the girl said something unexpected. She asked that next time she called him, he show up on time. He pulled a blanket off himself and carefully covered her with it, promising he'd do exactly that. He even seriously swore, on his own honor, that he would come to her aid. Unfortunately, she didn't hear that. She had fallen asleep. Amazing. She couldn't sleep in her own room for ages. But next to the demon herself, she dozed off in minutes. As soon as he heard her breathing, he decided to leave her be. He got up quieter than ever, careful not to wake her. Even his steps were on tiptoe. Incredible. Demons in stories like this can be sentimental too. But he didn't go far, just sat down right in front of her face, covered by the blanket. Thoughts ran through his head. This girl is so strange. Imagine falling asleep calmly in front of a demon. He couldn't believe it was possible. What was even stranger? She wasn't afraid of him at all. She came in and fell asleep within minutes, though she couldn't before. Desperate or fearless? Or maybe she just forgot he was the very creature that could one day take her life. Along his path, he'd encountered plenty of people who'd made deals with him. Too many to count. And they were all different. Some thought they were his master, believing they could break the deal and live long and happy. Some made all sorts of promises, forgetting his true nature. They swore they'd never disappear, even after many years. His thoughts turned to curiosity. He wanted to see what his friend would be like when death itself stared her in the face. In her dream, the girl was in a strange place, being called again and again by someone she couldn't see or recognize. The only thing she finally saw was a person covering themselves with their hands, as if trying to hide. But she wasn't unnoticed. Countless hands were reaching for her from behind, and she could never hide from them in time. So the only thing she could do to try to survive was shout her friend's name, the one person closest to her. So the only thing she could do to try to survive was shout her friend's name, the one person closest to her. Kyungsia was terrified seeing her friend like this. Scared, crying, innocent. She knew she had to get her out before those hands dragged her into the unknown. No matter how hard she tried to escape, it was useless. The same hands dragging Jiame grabbed her legs, preventing her from moving. It seemed her friend's hope had died in her eyes as the hands took full control. And then came the moment a terrifying male voice triumphantly shouted that he had finally caught her. Jiame screamed desperately, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to live. Yet Chiangxia could change nothing. Even in her dream, her friend was taken from her, and there was nothing she could do. Of course, if this nightmare had been more like a fantasy, she would have breathed a sigh of relief. But after living through something like that in real life, the pain after waking felt almost physical. In her mind, she apologized to Jiame for not being able to help, even in a dream. By the way, when she fully woke up, she realized someone else had been in the room. Turning her head, she found Bai Jiho there. He was asleep too. What struck her as odd was that he was sitting upright, just on the floor. The girl quietly, on her tiptoes you could say, crept over to him. She realized he was probably sleeping there to guard her while she slept. And for that, she felt genuinely grateful to Jihu. She even reached out to him to adjust his hair. But the demon, being his usual self, even in sleep, scared her by suddenly mumbling some nonsense about sweets and sugar. What a glutton for sugar. She concluded that getting that close to him was dangerous. She might accidentally wake him, and who knows what he'd think. But before getting up to leave, she glanced at the demon once more, thinking that if his horns had grown back, he was probably recovering already. Ironically, the blanket Jihu had used to cover her earlier was now draped over him. And surprisingly, she realized she wasn't afraid of him at all. In fact, between the two of them, she considered herself more of the monster than him. While the only being she could talk to was asleep, she decided to take a walk. She was amazed that despite his thousands of years of life, the apartment was full of modern stuff. There were all sorts of things on the shelves, books, antiques, and among all that clutter, the photo album caught her eye the most. She didn't hesitate. She decided to flip through that photo album, neatly placed within view. The first photo she saw was of a man, refined, aristocratic. The next one even had a caption, suggesting he was a ghost. Again, very aristocratic. Their eyes were strikingly similar, and she guessed who it was. Hard to believe, but there was even a woman. And weird as it was, she admitted that Jihu had been quite a stunner. And you couldn't ignore his childhood photo, it was absolutely adorable. She became curious about the demon's story. How did he become who he was? There was even a photo of what he looked like now. Still graceful and refined, just fully adapted to the world's standards. He probably realized she was awake because he appeared behind her, agreeing silently that he was indeed quite the looker. Looking at all the photos, she wondered if Bai Jiho was the only demon of his kind on Earth. So she asked him. She asked out of curiosity, but in true Bai Jiho style, he screamed like a girl in a sandbox, accusing her of thinking about someone else, claiming he wasn't good enough and all that. After that outburst, she wasn't so curious anymore. She said she was just worried about the demon being lonely and avoiding his next fit of hysteria over women and their mindset, suggested she feed him. Chiangxia remembered he only ate sweets, so she already had a plan, judging by the satisfied look on her face. While getting ready, she excitedly told him about a nearby bakery where she worked part-time. She said she could visit right now to make him something tasty and sweet. She recalled that it was the same bakery where they first met, and where she was accused of secretly seeing Bai Jiho. She was surprised when she saw him blush and nod, remembering. Then he slowly, as if savoring the words, said that if she meant the bakery downstairs, it seemed it belonged to him. It was like a bucket of cold water poured over her. Incredible. He was wealthy. He seemed like a simple guy, just quite successful. Once at the bakery, in the kitchen, she asked him to at least pretend not to recognize anything, addressing him as Demon-sama. That title didn't sit well with him. He grimaced and asked her not to call him that again. The girl didn't answer, just tied her hair up and said she now understood why there was a peculiar smell sometimes, and her teacher explained that when that smell was in the bakery, a special guest, Bai Ji-ho, was coming. Now she realized he was both the owner and the special guest. It was unclear what made the demon salivate more: her smile, which could light up any model, or the thought of sweets. She thought he was just that hungry. He wiped his drool and asked if she worried about him like that, making her flustered. A little later, while she was busy baking, he asked if she regretted that, even for revenge, she had to go through all this in her dreams. The girl answered thoughtfully, as if she had already considered it. She said she regretted a lot in life, hadn't done many things, and felt guilty, but she didn't regret giving her life to him that night. It was irreversible, like the things she regretted. Life is what it is. You have to accept it. But she had a question for Ji-hoo. She looked at him sadly, yet hopefully, asking if she could meet her friend when she also passed to the other side. The demon said yes, but it wasn't true. He lied, and she chose to blindly believe him, to trust him. Later, after he had stuffed himself with her pastries, they talked a bit about sweets. The demon joked that he hadn't had time to fully taste what she made, so it would be good if she cooked for him again tomorrow. Well, technically, since it was past midnight, it was already Saturday for them. But since it was the weekend, she blushed and said she wouldn't have time. Her friend's funeral was that day. The demon immediately promised heroically that he'd be there for her on that hard day. But things didn't go as he planned. The next day, the guard had to hold him back to take him to a commercial shoot. He struggled like crazy, throwing a total tantrum like a child. Tan Qianxia calmly told him it was fine for her to go alone. The guard whispered to his master that if he didn't go, he'd have to pay compensation. But threats like that didn't bother him. He had plenty of money. Eventually, the guard said this unstoppable energy should go into filming and tossed Bai Ji-ho into the van. Later, to make sure he couldn't escape, the guard slammed the door loudly. The man pressed his face against the bus window, peeking outside. The girl just wished him luck at work. She also handed a package with the cake to the guard, saying that if it wasn't too much trouble, it would be great if he could use it to feed Ji-hoo. The man in the car only saw the picture, so he freaked out when the girl gave the cake to the guard. He absolutely wouldn't allow that. Well, tantrums aside, they eventually went off to work, leaving the girl alone behind. She didn't really mind going alone. In fact, it almost felt better that way, though her heart still ached deeply. Xiangxia expected there wouldn't be many people, and there didn't need to be. Just the elderly lady, sitting alone on a bench with her head bowed. She knew she would meet her friend's grandmother. It was something she anticipated, but that didn't make it any less painful. When Xiangxia came inside, the grandmother lifted her eyes and invited her to sit next to her. At that moment, the girl felt she couldn't hold back her emotions any longer. She approached the grandmother and fell to her knees, crying like a child. For the first time, she could really let it all out. The grandmother stroked her hair and head, soothing her, telling her they had to be strong for the one who was no longer here. Out of kindness, no one told the old lady the real reason her granddaughter had died. They all lied to her to spare her pain. The loss itself was already painful, and its reason? The grandmother believed her dear girl had left this world because her legs suddenly gave out. She comforted the Qiangxia, saying their girl had always smiled and left this world with dignity. She said they shouldn't mourn Jiame, but instead live, for her. Finally, the girl wiped her tears and agreed that the grandmother was right. Moreover, since it was hardest on her here, she had to be the support. Later, Qiangxia stepped back a bit from the grandmother, and both of them heard someone calling her. It turned out that Han Xinqian had also come to see Jiame, along with a few other employees. They properly said their goodbyes to the girl, leaving a bouquet. While the woman said her farewells, the girl couldn't take her eyes off her. This mysterious person had a lot yet to reveal. Later, the woman approached the grandmother separately, bowed and said the money she was giving should at least help her a little. The grandmother might have refused, but Qiangxia intervened, saying she really should accept it. While there was something to discuss with Han Xinqian, the woman agreed and they left the room to talk about what needed to be said. As soon as they stepped out, Han Xinqian pulled out a cigarette, even offering one to the girl, who quickly refused. She didn't smoke. She also scolded the woman, saying it wasn't polite to smoke here, and that it would bother her too. Han Xinqian was taken aback. She was about to say she didn't understand this privacy stuff when Qiangxia bluntly asked if she had the memory card. For a split second, it was like a jolt of electricity hit her. She was stunned and hadn't expected that question. But Qiangxia felt completely confident. Han Xinqian couldn't understand how this girl even knew something like that, since all evidence and truth had disappeared with her friend. She smiled professionally, sweetly, and said she had no idea what memory card she was talking about. It wasn't known to her. Then the girl pushed her hair back, revealing her wound, and explained that she had found a camera in the bathroom yesterday, and then was beaten in her own home, left alive only because they didn't find what they were after. Han Xinqian undoubtedly knew what it was about. The girl said she understood. It was strange that someone knew. But if Han Xinqian didn't want the same to happen to her, she had to hand over the flash drive. Her only goal was the truth. She didn't want to harm anyone, but she wanted to know who had taken her friend's life. Han Xinqian asked, confused, what the point of all this was. The person who died couldn't be brought back, so why bother? Tianxia replied seriously that she didn't want another victim to fall to these horrors, so they needed to expose the people who destroy innocent lives. Silence fell between them. Long, slow. It seemed the boss hesitated. She certainly knew things that could help the investigation. But she made her decision quickly, turning away from the girl, saying she didn't know anything. Nothing to say. Tianxia felt the lump rise to her throat again. Why was this woman so stubborn, knowing lives were at stake? She couldn't hold back and shouted, asking what mysterious they her friend had mentioned before deciding meant. She screamed after her, saying her friend might not have had to die. And if the woman knew the truth, out of respect for the one who had died, she should have said something. The two men who had come earlier were talking about cigarettes. They said they usually tried not to smoke, but today it was hard to resist. They also remembered their colleague, who always said a kind word, cared for them, and brought them coffee. They regretted not saying more kind words to her. One of the men said, "That's just human nature. You only start valuing things after you lose them." The girl was probably terrified when those photos were shown, thinking maybe even they, her colleagues, were involved. The man with glasses admitted he also got the photos, but didn't open them. He was stronger than the temptation. His friend respected him even more for that, realizing he was better than he seemed. The men continued, saying it really shouldn't have happened. She was way too young. She had so much life ahead of her. It was so empty. Only a few close people. They also said they had to lie to the old lady. If she had known about the photos, she probably would have gone crazy. So, what a tragedy. The men felt they at least had to make sure the lady was well taken care of, since her granddaughter could no longer do so. As they were about to leave, one of the men suddenly froze, like he'd seen a ghost, surprised by the sharpness of the guy behind him. It turned out that the elderly lady had been standing right there behind them the whole time, in the doorway, hearing their entire conversation, including the reason her granddaughter had died. And in that very moment, tears welled up in her eyes. Learning that her beloved girl hadn't left this world by fate, it was just too painful. The men rushed to her, saying it wasn't what it seemed, that they could explain everything. But it was too late. The words couldn't be taken back. The grandmother nearly fainted, crying and shouting that that they had pushed her to this. The men exchanged guilty glances. They hadn't wanted this, but I guess that was fate. The truth had to come out for justice to be served. At the old lady's request, they led her to her granddaughter, and now the woman had forgotten all her own advice about smiling like her girl. She just sobbed uncontrollably. It was hard to describe the kind of despair that knocked her off her feet in an instant. At one point, when Tianxia and the boss were returning, they heard shouting and crying, even from that distance. Tianxia panicked and quickened her pace almost to a run. She'd recognize May's grandmother's voice anywhere. As soon as they got there, they saw that the woman, who'd held herself like a soldier all evening, was crying for the first time with such raw pain. The boss asked the men, flustered, what had happened in the few minutes she'd been gone, and they admitted everything honestly. Watching the scene, seeing how strong Grandma May broke down under the weight of the truth, the Tianxia couldn't hold it in either and cried again. This was real grief, the kind that knocks you off your feet. She asked them not to do anything, not to take Grandma May away because they were already preparing to leave, but it wasn't the right time yet. The boss told the men they could head home for now and she'd follow a little later. When Grandma May's sobs quieted a bit and she clutched a photo of her granddaughter, the girl decided to approach. She dropped to her knees in front of the grandmother to listen, to offer support. She heard the grandmother lamenting her girl who had felt despair until the very end, unable to find a way out or any support. She blamed herself, that an old lady like her, knowing nothing, could only sit and mourn her granddaughter. It was painful to remember the call from her granddaughter saying she missed her. and the grandmother hadn't understood or even come. Mrs. May cried out that she, an old woman who'd lived her life, would have rather died than her granddaughter. After hearing that, Chiangxia swore she'd never forgive them and would spend her life hunting down the people who had stolen a young life. It was time for revenge. They would pay for their actions, and only then could her dear friend rest in peace. 2 hours passed before the girl found the strength to calm down and leave the room. She felt beaten after shedding so many tears, but she had the drive to act. She hadn't expected anyone else to be on the bench when she left, but out of the corner of her eye, she noticed a figure. The girl stopped and asked why the boss had stayed so long, if she'd already said her goodbyes to the girl who had died. The woman suddenly stood and said that GMA hadn't been as strong as she'd thought. The truth is brutal, and she, for instance, couldn't handle it. Could Chiangxia survive a blow like that? The girl wiped her tears and, not exactly sounding convincing, said she was ready for the truth. For GMA. The woman exhaled and said that GMA wasn't the only victim. No, she simply couldn't handle it properly. The woman clenched her fist and admitted she had been one of the first. She had been among the victims first, and that's why she knew the truth. She began her story with events from 7 years ago, when she first joined the company, sent there by her university. She knew her stuff, though she was nervous. Chances of landing that company were low. But she wanted to stand out and give it her all. And so they took her, the potential, the drive to grow, the motivation, it was all there. At first, she was inspired by the job, believing that with enough effort, she could become the best. But she realized things weren't like she imagined when she saw how far justice was from reality. One day, exhausted with dark circles under her eyes, she ran into the office of the man who once inspired her to ask why her name wasn't even on the project credits. The only answer he gave was a question, one she should have asked before entering his office. He knew how to manipulate people, how to control them. The girl froze and replied that she should have knocked. He praised her for knowing the rules, but said the problem was that she brazenly broke them. That's when she realized there was no justice here. Everything was done deliberately, for money, not for people. Of course, colleagues saw it all and talked about it. They saw she was diligent, but they'd worked there long enough not to understand why she worked herself so hard. She admitted she'd been foolish, just trying to prove something to herself, ignoring the survival rules of that place. There was a moment she felt swept up in the chaos of work and effort, being carried away by a wave. She didn't know if all her suffering happened because she refused to go with the flow, trying instead to forge her own path. Didn't she deserve respect just for choosing herself and her future? She was trying to pull herself out of what kept dragging her down. She would have given up, accepted their survival rules, if not for the hand that reached out to save her. When she hit rock bottom, she made the most important choice of her life. She fell in love with the man in the finance department, and he actively sought meetings with her. She decided to pursue a relationship. They slept together, dated, and spent a lot of time together. At one point, he even gave her an expensive watch, saying he saw it and thought she'd like it. She was terrified. The watch was insanely expensive, so she had to explain to a grown man that money doesn't grow on trees. But the man said he loved her more than any material thing. He even considered asking the director to transfer her to his department. Up until that fateful moment, she thought their love could overcome any hardships and save them both from the company's harsh routine. Then the man got a message. She'd heard that sound before, but this time it caught her attention, making her heart skip a beat. On the locked screen, she saw her name, but to see the content, he'd have to unlock the phone. A memory hit her instantly. How they'd talked about his car's lucky number. She knew if he caught her like this, there'd be questions, but she felt she had to check. The contents of those messages, they were horrifying. She saw herself labeled as the girl with the bob and a whole bunch of her naked photos. Being described like an unnamed object, everything happening behind her back. It struck her right in the heart. As soon as she put the phone down, the man came out of the bathroom. Honestly, there were no words for how repulsive he looked to her now. He still tried hugging her, asking what was wrong with his beloved, why she was crying like that. She felt sick to her stomach from him and his fake concern. There was no love between them. No, he was a damn traitor, the one who had dared to ruin her life. When she pushed him away and looked at him with sheer horror, he kept asking what had happened, why she was acting so strange. She explained that all those photos were being sent to a group created inside the company, selling naked pictures of their female employees. She was completely drained telling all of this, having to mentally go back to make sure she hadn't missed a single detail. Stepping forward, she said the worst part was that he was making money off those photos. And since she had checked more than just that one message, she saw that he'd earned a crazy amount for the last photo, writing to his friends that she was annoying everyone. She smiled grimly as she repeated the sum he'd gotten for selling her like livestock. She said that for those in the highest positions, they were just food, just products to parasitize. That's when she learned about the group trading girls. She said membership in the group was earned by submitting a certain number of photos. And then Tianxia asked why she hadn't spoken up sooner. She answered with a question. What would Tianxia have done in her place? She yelled that no one should look at her like that. No one knew what she'd been forced to face. She hadn't acted wrong, so? Something wrong. She had chosen self-protection. She felt she shouldn't have sacrificed her career for others, and asked Tianxia why she thought lying in cold dirt was resistance, while living the life she chose was betrayal. She asked the world what she'd done wrong, when all she'd wanted was to live, and covered her face with her hands as she cried. Crying, she said she was just trying her best to live in this world. And somehow it started to rain during this heavy conversation, perfectly timed, as if nature itself understood her grief. She looked up, her tears blending with the raindrops streaming down her face. Lost in her sadness, she didn't notice the girl approaching to hug her. She understood everything, and thanked the woman for trusting her, for telling her everything. Holding the boss, Chiangxia realized she couldn't even imagine how strong someone had to be to survive something like this, to go through hell alive. She was an ambitious woman with dreams, but everything started collapsing the moment she tried to work fairly. She clawed her way through the place step by step, facing obstacle after obstacle. And worst of all, she endured a horrifying experience, forced to battle the leering eyes of perverts. The girl now understood why she had hesitated. Choosing her own life wasn't a mistake. The woman, slightly calmer, said she could help more, but only for herself. And that's how their mission began. Next, they had to report everything to Bai Jiho. Arriving at the place with Han Xinqian, the woman asked about their plan. The girl pointed to the man beside her, saying he'd be the one to help. Since it was a guard standing there, not Jiho, the woman looked at him and concluded he could be trusted. But before she could feel relieved, a red-haired man jumped in front of her, shouting that he would help. The girl averted her gaze at him when the woman looked at her and said he was telling the truth. Watching the three of them closely, she wondered how a trainee, an idol, and a mafioso ended up in the same group. A unique sight. Now she had to decide whether to trust them and help, or back off while she still could. What a bunch of weirdos. Later, Han Xinqian decided she could trust them, and the girl asked her to repeat the story. This time in more detail. Around 300 people were in the group. The criteria for joining were strict, and they fiercely protected each other. All members were anonymous. It was almost impossible to figure out who belonged. You had to post lots of videos and photos before becoming a member, and none of the material could be shared outside. That was one of the rules. She explained that the rule didn't protect the women, the victims. They just didn't want to lose money. Outsiders would never get access. She called them, without holding back, a bunch of rotten people who considered themselves and money above the lives of others. Tan Qianxia said that, judging by her words, her friend GMA's photos were in the group too. But something went wrong, and leaks and rumors spread. The woman covered her face with her hand, guessing that GMA had just crossed someone's path. Chiangxia felt sad hearing that. How heartless must someone be to seek revenge like that? Bai Jiho thought for a moment and asked the woman if she, by chance, remembered the email of the person receiving the photos. She replied that even if she did, it wouldn't matter. They constantly update that info. But she had a memory card from the bathroom. The girl immediately asked if she'd already looked through it or if there was more to tell, but no. She hadn't, wanting to forget it all. Chiangxia suggested handing over the card so they could examine it in detail. It was too dangerous for her to keep it. Since the woman agreed and couldn't go herself, it was finally the guard's turn to help them, a new mission. Arriving at the office, she left the guard at the door to her office, telling him to wait about 2 minutes. She hoped it wouldn't take long and that she could finally get rid of it, wash the future off her. So she hurried searching. Turns out she'd stuck the card to a cup. Nobody would have noticed otherwise. But to her horror, a man's voice came from behind saying, "Ah, finally, you've shown where the card is." She spun around, terrified. It was him, the man in the white suit. But in the dark, his face was invisible. She asked how, when, and why he had come here. Her office was off limits. He smiled and said he didn't need permission. At that moment, she still didn't fully realize just how dangerous he really was. But fear and panic flashed across her face so fast, she didn't even have time to scream before what happened next. About 5 minutes later, the guard knocked on the door and asked if everything was okay, but there was no answer. Worried, he burst into the office, shouting her name and froze in surprise at what he saw. Meanwhile, Chiangxia and Bai Jiho were anxiously waiting, hoping someone would call to say everything was okay. When Chiangxia's phone rang, she jumped, startling Jiho. Hoping to hear Han Xinqian's voice, she nervously lifted the phone to her ear. But it wasn't her. It was another woman from work calling about some changes in Chiangxia's work. She was now Bai Jiho's representative. Giving her companion a disapproving look, she realized it was definitely his doing. Great. Hanging up, she wanted to question him a little about it. Then the demon's phone rang. Probably the guard. And sure enough, it was. But the expression on the man's face shifted from surprise to frown when he asked what happened. The girl was so nervous she nearly snatched the phone from him, but he finally said, "Han Xinqian is missing." They didn't waste time, called a taxi, and rushed to the office. The driver even had to calm Chiangxia down, saying he couldn't drive faster without risking police attention. The girl was trembling when the man asked if maybe the woman had just changed her mind and run away. Chiangxia said that was unlikely. Madame Han would have called if she'd changed her mind. What scared her more was that something might have happened to Madame Han. She'd already been attacked, so there was no guarantee it wouldn't happen again. When they arrived, the girl nearly ran to the guard, immediately asking what had really happened. The guard explained that Han Xinqian had gone into the office alone, and when he waited too long, he decided to check, but she was already gone. It was too weird. There weren't supposed to be any secret exits. She couldn't have just vanished into thin air, right? They confirmed the guard hadn't left, and then Jihu went inside, asking them to wait outside for a few minutes. Chiangxia stopped him, saying he hadn't recovered yet in case he planned to use his powers. But the man winked and said now was exactly the right time to show off his strength. He probably knew what he was doing, so the girl didn't follow, trusting him. For a few seconds, the idol scanned the office but saw nothing unusual. Then he looked up, using the gesture to channel his demonic power, the same one he had used before to travel back in time. He needed to figure out how the girl had just vanished from the room. He managed to enter the past without difficulty. Everything around turned red. There stood the familiar woman, but her voice was barely audible. For a strange detail, the demon couldn't distinguish her words at all. He just couldn't hear them. Moreover, the place she was staring at was empty. Nobody was there, even though she was clearly talking to someone. It was even frustrating that he couldn't understand what was going on. Everything felt so strange. And the moment she got so scared she stepped back, ready to scream, was the most shocking. What the hell was happening? So, empty-handed, he returned to Chiangxia. When asked if he'd found anything, his answer was no. Even the girl didn't get it. Why was there nothing? The demon explained the room felt like a separate, cut-off dimension, inaccessible to him, as strange as that sounded. He even sensed that in that room, his powers made no sense, and told the girl that it seemed things had just gotten more complicated. Meanwhile, two men brought an important patient to the hospital. Everything was done confidentially, quietly, so as not to draw attention. Meeting the girl on duty, the man said a VIP guest had arrived, needing a private room. She nodded, saying everything would be ready quickly. She barely had time to peek under the hood of the person in the wheelchair, but still didn't see much. And that was the same woman who had simply vanished into thin air for our main heroes. Well, it was the second day after Han Xinqian's disappearance. At the hospital, the day started with the nurses doing their rounds. On the surface, it seemed like the day could have been nice. Music, sun, good weather. One of the girls broke the silence and asked her coworker if she'd seen the patient who had arrived yesterday. And yeah, she had even took care of her treatment herself. The girl whispered as the other peeked around to make sure nobody was eavesdropping, that yesterday the new patient kept talking nonstop about some really weird stuff. She said the patient was going on about demons existing on Earth, that the police needed to be called, all that kind of thing. The other nurse replied that their patients were always a little strange. But the girl said, that's exactly what's weird. All their clients were women, and all a little off. Her coworker even shushed her with a finger. But it was too late. Clicking heels echoed in the office. A woman walked in and asked what they were talking about. Rhetorical question. She already knew. Folding her arms, she asked sternly how long they'd been working there. One said a year, the other 2 months. She scolded them, saying the pay at this clinic was almost 3 times higher precisely because there were rules. Rule number 1, never talk about VIP clients. The girls immediately apologized, but she cut them off, saying if she heard it again, she'd fire both of them. The nurses bowed and sincerely thanked her for the second chance. Only then did the senior nurse leave, hoping she'd scared them enough to keep their mouths shut. Well, life went on for Tan Tianxia after Madame Han disappeared. Today was the day she decided to do something important. Specifically, she finally decided to visit her friend's apartment. It had been a long time since she'd chosen that key. After her friend was gone, the girl couldn't bring herself to visit that place. The reason was clear. The apartment absorbed all their happy moments, soaked up their tears and emotions. Everything there made her heart ache. She remembered sitting at the table, drinking and snacking, talking about men. And evenings on the couch, sharing a blanket, eating popcorn. Her friend reacted emotionally to everything, while Chiangxia stayed calm and joked with her. She also remembered them planning to buy apartments next to each other, tearing down the elevator wall between them. Yamei said they'd have to work hard to earn the money for it, but once they did, they'd live well. That night, the girl wanted to bring up a serious topic, Lu Xingnan. As soon as she tried to tell her friend she found him weird, she wanted to explain everything, but her friend fell asleep. Sitting on the bed, the girl texted Bai Jiho that she'd arrived at Jiamei's place to check if there were any clues. The search for Han Xinqian she left to him. When he agreed and said there was nothing he couldn't handle, the girl didn't reply, set her phone down, and it dinged again. Turns out it was Bai Jiho again. He wrote that she must never leave him without a reply. Never. So Qiangxia agreed and set the phone aside to look around again. She didn't really feel like reading, but she felt the urge to get up, approach the bookshelf, and take one book. But just as she nearly grabbed it, something fell out, a little piece of paper. Where did it come from? She decided to pick it up and see what was on it, and was surprised to find a contraception instruction. That probably meant something, so she decided to check the shelves for anything as strange as this instruction. Of course, there was nothing. She would have noticed it before, so she had to search through stuff, in places out of sight. The girl figured they might have cleaned everything, but there should still be details they missed if they'd been here. After a little searching, she did find something, so she called Lu Xingnan, who cheerfully asked why she was calling so suddenly. Qiangxia explained they needed to discuss something, if possible, even now. He was free. They agreed to meet at Jiamei's place. The girl didn't take her eyes off the little thing in front of her. The man said he understood and asked her to send the address. She sent it and, holding up the cufflink, said if it really belonged to Lu Xingnan, she wouldn't let him go that easily. He wasn't exactly free. He was at a hotel with a girl. He told her he had business and gave her the number, saying he wouldn't return until morning. She was about to grumble that he was leaving her so boldly, but he kissed her cheek and asked her to be a good girl. As she got up, she noticed his strange expression, like something had happened. When she asked if everything was okay, he first stayed silent. He thought, was everything okay? He answered in a way that left her without an answer, as if he still didn't know if everything was fine, essentially not answering at all. Later, he did come and texted her again, or rather, waited for her to give the apartment number, then decided to just call. She saw the message, but didn't reply at first. She was in the guard's office at the time. Picking up the phone, she ignored the guard's question about what she needed, just motioned for him to be quiet. Watching the man, she told him the block and apartment number for Jiamei and explained the fastest way to get there. Hanging up, she pointed to what was on the security camera and asked if he'd seen the guy already. Just as the camera showed him, it was Lu Xingnan, but the guard didn't recognize him, said he'd never seen him before. The girl asked him to look more closely, but the guard had worked there long enough to be sure he didn't know him. The girl frowned at his answer. Had she been wrong? Would her investigation stall again? Seeing it was important, the guard suggested she contact the night guard who started after midnight. Just as the girl perked up and asked where to find him, another man appeared, older, and asked who they were looking for. Turns out it was him. She sat the man down at the table and asked him to look closely at the cameras to see if he recognized the man from the elevator. She was in a bit of a rush, so she quickly asked if he recognized him. But the man had only seen the back. How could he possibly know? Meanwhile, Lu Xingnan had already reached Jiamei's door and couldn't understand why he was called there. But nobody was opening the door. Where was Qiangxia? The girl then stepped out from around the corner and apologized for making him wait. He was surprised she came from that side and asked where she'd been, but got no answer. Instead, the night guard spoke up, asking why he hadn't seen the guy, GMA's guy, so long. Lu Xingnan made such a scary face that the girl worried for the guard's life. Real anger mixed with fear. Just as he was about to say the guard was mistaken, Chiangxia interrupted, saying the man was wrong. It was her friend. Lu Xingnan didn't even understand why she suddenly stood up for him, not letting him say a word. The girl hinted it was time to leave, along with the guard, even though he was surprised. She had asked him to come out and identify him. Yep, that was him. Lu Xingnan couldn't make sense of her weird behavior. Why didn't she ask him anything? But then the girl remembered she had something to give him. Casually, she held out her hand, which had a small trinket on it. Nervously smiling, he said she was mistaken. That definitely wasn't his cufflink. Chiangxia, surprised, said she didn't even know what it was, but he shone a light on it. It was a cufflink. How did he even know? Lu Xingnan explained reasonably. It wasn't something that would take long to recognize. Just a little trinket, a cufflink. Moving further into the room, he asked what exactly Chiangxia needed help with. He had plans and was in a rush. But the girl said he wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. Lu Xingnan looked at her in surprise, not understanding what she meant. She didn't waste time. If you catch a wolf, you call the hunter. So she called out Bai Jiho's name. Lu Xingnan nervously smiled, thinking the girl probably had some issues in her head. She was talking nonsense. He didn't understand. He didn't even notice someone else appear behind him, whispering in his ear that a mere mortal had no right to speak so boldly to Chiangxia, calling her Hey instead of her name. Bai Jiho first scared the guy half to death, then asked why he'd been called if he was already searching for the same woman. The girl said there were more important matters, and Bai Jiho, smirking, asked if he should deal with this guy. Lu Xingnan jumped back from the shock, asking what kind of nonsense they were making up here. Chiangxia seriously said they hadn't done anything he didn't deserve, and were not going to. But she was more interested in what he had done before. Again, that nervous, now deceitful smile on his face. He definitely did something, even though he claimed he was innocent. The girl ignored him and asked Bai Jiho to deal with the man to squeeze the truth out of him. She was ready to pay any price for the truth, and the man got his demonic reckoning. Lu Xingnan got so scared he shrieked like a little girl and ran for the door. He didn't get far, because a second later the demon stood behind him, holding him by the heart, squeezing. The man freaked out, pain making him gasp. He felt the cold hand clutching his heart, claws ready to pierce the organ that kept him alive. Chiangxia cried as she watched. He had to pay for his sins. He had to pay right there, in the place where her friend's life would never flicker again, where her voice would never be heard, where she would never be present. Bai Jiho said the guy had nothing to fear. It wouldn't kill him, just let them control his body. Meanwhile, events unfolded elsewhere, partly connected to what was happening here. There was romance and clearly pleasure between two people, nothing unusual. But suddenly the blonde stopped. He felt something wrong. His face darkened, surprising his partner. When she asked what happened, he brushed it off, smiled, and told his lover he had just been thinking, but they continued. Then Bai Jiho reached out to Chiangxia, saying he could show her everything firsthand. The moment she touched him, it was like an electric shock. Her eyes reddened, and she found herself in Lu Xingnan's memories. She was back on the day they first met. GMA introduced her friend to her senior colleague. She could even hear his thoughts. He thought the new girl was cute. He shook her hand, introduced himself, and thought she seemed too guarded and cold. He'd have to deal with that, so better stick with GMA. She was beautiful, and probably liked him. She smiled a lot when she saw him. Later memories involved the day GMA wanted to discuss their relationship, which, according to her, the man had been hiding for way too long. She tried to explain that the company had lots of couples and didn't hide it, but Lu Xingnan insisted that since he was climbing the career ladder, admitting a relationship would signal to management that he wasn't serious about work. He always manipulated the situation, asking if she wanted him to let go of that chance. What could she do? She stayed quiet. Bai Jiho transported her to another memory, another day. Someone pounded desperately on Lu Xingnan's door. Night outside, he didn't know who it was. Behind the door was GMA, soaked from the rain, but he didn't care. He was angry she broke their agreement and came to his place. But GMA didn't care. She showed a video where she was naked and, raising her voice, asked him what the hell this was. He was more surprised that she had the video. She shouted that someone had told her about a group where they bought such things. She knew everything. And she came to ask him, was he the one who, damn it, betrayed her? Or was he the one who spread that cursed video? He scratched his head. Someone inside the apartment asked who'd come, and Lu Xingnan told the girl she probably came just to spite him. He said Jiame could just deal with it. She wasn't the only one being filmed naked in the company, so there was no need to play the pity card or show up like that. She was too shocked and desperate to even say anything, and he calmly put a hand on her shoulder, telling her they should part ways. He was busy talking right now. Later, she didn't even want to speak. Walking quickly away from the trader, she said there was nothing to talk about. Lu Xingnan grabbed her hand, saying that even if she tried, she wouldn't get anywhere. There were dangerous people in administration. She said it wasn't his damn business, pulled away and left. The man yelled after her that he was innocent. He'd warned her. By the way, the whole scene was being watched by the night guard. Later, in the boss's office, Lu Xingnan was told to calm the girl down, make her shut up, and not try to spill anything anywhere. The man suggested just pressing one button that would send her photo to every corner of the company. He waved the phone right in Lu Xingnan's face, asking if he'd do it himself or if he wanted him to do it instead, if he was too weak. The man mocked him, saying Lu Xingnan was a weakling if he couldn't even press a button because he felt sorry for the girl he just slept with. The provocation worked. Lu Xingnan snatched the phone and said no one ever said he wasn't capable. With a smirk and no regret, he pressed the button. The mysterious man said that now Lu Xingnan had prospects at work. Later, after doing such a cruel thing just to crush Jiame morally, he decided to text her. Calmly, without a shred of remorse, he wrote that she should just, finally leave this world, and humming a little tune, leaned back in his chair. At that moment, showing Tan Tianxia everything related to the truth, the demon let the man fall to the floor. Han Xintian didn't really understand what had been done to him, and after hitting his head on the floor, he passed out completely. Bai Jiho turned to the girl and said he had shown everything he'd found that was relevant to the case. She was in despair at what she saw. God, she felt so sorry for her friend. That damn guy practically caused her death. This idiot took an innocent life. In desperation, she screamed across the room, who was that mysterious man who had the damn order to send her photo across the company? Why couldn't she see his face? The demon didn't answer. He just looked at the guy lying before them while the girl tried to recover mentally from what she'd seen. Meanwhile, the blonde we saw earlier said that a good story never really ends, which meant even after a story concluded, its impression lingered. This fit perfectly with Changxia's investigation into her friend's death. Bai Jiho also didn't understand why the man's face couldn't be seen, why his powers didn't affect that specifically. The girl suddenly fell to her knees, shaking the man and asking who had pressured him to send those photos. Barely coming to his senses, he said he didn't know, so Qiangxia shook him even harder. Lu Xingnan covered his face with his hands, saying he only knew he was covering up any potential problems that could pop up in the group. He awkwardly compared him to their good guard. A good guard would never protect actions like that. But the guy's words struck Bai Jiho, giving him an important thought. Not every person, even with money, could solve all problems. The demon crouched down to the guy and asked if he could meet that man only at the annual press conference. Bai Jiho put a finger to his head to check if he was lying. His words were true. But the demon didn't withdraw his hand. He started doing something with the guy, making the girl question what was happening. The demon explained he erased the guy's memories of this day. It was important he didn't spill anything about Bai Jiho's powers. The girl half fell, half sat beside him, saying now they'd have to wait for the press conference. She still hadn't stopped crying, so Jihu reached for her, asking her to calm down. He said the girl had done all she could. The only one responsible for her friend's death was this bastard, and he would punish him. The girl replied they couldn't stop there. The chat and its members were also guilty. And that unknown man. Tan Chenxia said that if Jime's last wish was to reveal them, she had to fulfill it. Bai Jiho asked if she wasn't afraid of dying. She admitted, of course, she was scared and worried about that. In her thoughts, she added that in this place, soaked with her friend's presence, she couldn't stop anymore. The one thing she wanted more than anything was to meet her friend after her own death, to hold her hand again. She wanted to smile at her again and tell her she had fulfilled her last wish, that she had avenged her. Then her friend's soul would rest, because together they ensured other girls would be saved and justice would prevail. And she could finally repay Jiame for standing up for her back in childhood. Jihu, seeing the girl lying on him, concluded she was way too tired today. He placed his hand on her head, putting her to sleep. She really needed that. And he still had one task left to finish. Saying this, he looked at the man lying next to them, saying it was his time to get what he deserved. Meanwhile, the girl who had shared the bed with the blonde had already woken up. She carefully fixed her hair and walked over to the man sitting by the window. Smiling, she leaned on his shoulder and said he wasn't thinking about her at all. He'd woken up and hadn't even said a word. Even if he'd been about to say something, he couldn't, because the phone rang and threw them off. The man got up and grabbed the device, telling the girl it was time for her to go. She didn't resist, just said she might call if she got bored. Then, while telling someone on the phone not to call him outside work hours, the girl went over to the closet to get ready. She caught bits of the conversation, like he was back at his old spot talking about some guy and why call if it's already settled. He twirled a glass in his hands, saying that solving problems was his job. No need for anyone to interfere or teach him. The girl took forever putting on her dress. She was really just eavesdropping, probably more out of curiosity than anything else. The blonde noticed. He set the glass down and said there was something he needed to deal with. Someone was shamelessly eavesdropping. The girl nervously smiled, saying the dress was tight. That's why it took her so long. He kinda leaned over her threateningly when she tried to leave and say goodbye. The man said there was nothing she could do or change. He was way too angry right now, so she could go ahead and blame her tragic fate. The girl froze hearing that. It sounded like a threat. Then sheer horror flashed in her eyes at what she saw. Lord, she'd never met such a monster or such terror in her life. Meanwhile, Ten Tianxia was asleep. But after everything that had happened, her sleep couldn't be restful or even pleasant. Within seconds, she jerked awake in bed from fear. Again, a dream with her friend, only worse, now knowing what she had learned today. Half asleep, she lost track of time. Where was she? Consciousness came back quickly, and she recognized Bai Jiho's apartment. She was surprised she'd slept until it got dark outside. But Jiho said it wasn't surprising. She was really exhausted. He'd almost lost his wings carrying her. She lowered her head and apologized for the trouble she'd caused. He told her she needed to eat. He brought a tray of food, lots of sweets, a drink, and one burger. The girl said she couldn't focus on food right now. She was more curious about Lu Xingnan and asked what had happened to him. His answer shocked her. He said he left him back home at GMA's place. She panicked, grabbing the man's sleeve, asking how he could just leave him there unpunished. He was a killer. The man even had to place his hands on her shoulders to calm her. It looked like a nervous breakdown. He asked her to calm down a little, take a breath, and just listen. She relaxed, and it was clear how hard it had been for her. He smiled and reminded the friend that, after all, he was a demon, meaning there was no creature besides him that could understand fear so deeply. So, about Lu Xingnan. He was still out cold back at GMA's place. Memory wiped, thanks to Jihu. Coming to, he didn't know where he was, why he wasn't home, or what had happened. But turning his head and seeing the moonlit apartment, he recognized it. GMA's place. First thought, get the hell out of here. Didn't even matter how he ended up there. But before he could open the door, damn it, Jimei did it for him. She appeared right on the threshold. Seeing her, he screamed like a maniac. Hard to even describe. It was terrifying to see a girl who wasn't in this world anymore. He rushed to the elevator, almost falling, forcing himself to believe that if this wasn't a hallucination, it was a dream. He slammed the button like a madman. He tried to convince himself it was okay. She wasn't alive anymore. Whoever that was, it wasn't her. But the nightmare wasn't over. When the elevator doors opened, the sight nearly knocked him off his feet. And it did. There she was. GMA. It was her, accompanied by some man. She first asked if he was okay, but her guide told her not to worry. Just get moving before he went in, heading downstairs. In reality, the girl in the elevator was someone else, or so she said, because she'd gotten scared. Lu Xingnan walked down the stairs, figuring it was Qiangxia playing with him, hiring actors for the act. He planned revenge on her until he stepped outside and froze, like hitting an invisible wall in pain. She wasn't alone. Everyone was in different looks, but all were bloody Jiamei. Like soulless dolls or vengeful spirits, they asked how he felt, if he was okay, if he needed help. Some yelled that he was weird. He probably was having a breakdown, grinning insanely, mumbling to himself that it was all in his head. He clung to the building, screaming for them not to come near him. A crowd gathered around Lu Xingnan, none resembling Jiamei, all saying he would destroy Tan Qianxia. It was definitely her doing. As for her, Jihu had told her the truth. She apologized for freaking out and thanked him for his work. He blushed, proud of himself, scratched his nose, saying, "Hey, that's still my job." The girl nodded, then suddenly reached for the zipper, starting to undo her jacket. He stopped her, grabbed her hands, blushing even more, saying he didn't accept payment in kind, so no need for that. The girl explained she was just trying to stick to their agreement, so she unzipped it so he could bite. She kinda wanted them to restore his full strength and energy faster, but she looked like she had zero energy herself. He understood she was right. After all, she'd agreed to the deal herself. But before he reached for her, his hand dropped, which left both him and the girl wondering, what was that about? He admitted that before, there was never anyone worth breaking the rules for. He'd always followed them. When you get something, you gotta pay for it. Jihu told the girl that today the payment was gonna hurt, and she just gave a tired smile and nodded. Then he reached for her neck and, still feeling pity, sank his teeth into it. This time, there was enough blood to trickle down her neck in a thin line, and she grabbed the man's sleeve in pain. Next day, the first thing we see, Blondie asleep in his bed, after brutally and savagely getting rid of the girl. Meanwhile, someone wanted to interrupt his sleep, because a tall man entered the room. He stopped, looked around, and then at the man in front of him. Then, spotting the blonde's shirt, he grabbed it and walked over to the bed. The shirt flew right onto the tattooed back. The man who'd just arrived said he knew. The blonde wasn't asleep anymore. True enough, he rolled onto his side, stretched luxuriously, and looked at the man standing over him, clearly annoyed. He admitted he was too lazy to check who had come in and asked what they even wanted. Instead, the man in the suit picked up the remote. You could tell he was pissed when he said the blonde needed to watch the news. The news anchor said that in a well-known hotel, they'd found a young woman's body, drained of blood, kneeling, and that she was clearly not alone in the room. They said the hotel couldn't provide info on who was in that room, and no cameras captured the events of that night. That was enough for the blonde to see why he was being called in, and the man asked, was it his doing, that body? Blondie smiled smugly, spreading his arms, saying, if he already knows, why ask? And honestly, he thought that atrocity was art. The man in the suit asked if the blonde even ever listened to warnings. He'd been told not to cross the line. The blonde got out of bed, pulled on his pants, saying that fixing this problem for the Wan family heir, the man in front of him, wouldn't be hard. That heir was the man standing there, who said the blonde had no idea how much effort and money it takes to cover up situations like this. Those words made the blonde frown. He was getting irritated. A second later, he grabbed the Wan heir by the throat, reminding him who'd provided all these resources for their family. With a sly smile, he reminded him that generation after generation, they got everything by serving him. And if Mr. Wan ever spoke in that tone again, he'd meet the same fate as the hotel girl. There was nothing left to do but promise it wouldn't happen again and leave. By the elevator, the man touched his neck, the one the blonde had squeezed so hard. Who does that? In his mind, he called him a cursed god, but that was all he could do to the blonde. Insult him in his head. Just then, his phone vibrated in his pocket. Over the phone, they told him that regarding that media outlet they'd talked about, they'd basically already spread rumors about Zijia's romance. Mr. Wan said that was great, hung up, and set the phone down. When you want to distract people from one piece of news, shock them with another. Meanwhile, back at Bai Jiho's apartment, he was wearing an apron and gloves, cooking something. It looked like he had a recipe, but he was basically improvising. He didn't eat that kind of food, so he wasn't great at cooking. That mess in the pot, well, it definitely shouldn't be blue, so no point asking why it was. But he seemed satisfied. It was for the girl, and he decided she shouldn't get poisoned. By the way, Chiangxia came into the kitchen too, asking what he was doing. Turns out he was making her porridge. Looking at the pot, she said sure, she'd given him her life, but it wasn't necessary to take it right now. He yelled at her, saying she didn't appreciate anything. Millions of fans would kill to try this porridge. Eventually, he pushed her away so she wouldn't get in the way. She didn't resist much, walking toward the table where her phone was buzzing. In the company chat, people were talking about the second son of the company, Zijia, and Eileen, and sometimes messages popped up about the hotel incident and Bai Jiho. The girl even opened a photo to check it out. It was a bit blurry, but the girl was easy to recognize. She was pretty famous. Looking closely at the photo, she seemed to recognize the man sitting next to the celebrity. Though not fully visible, some facial features suggested they'd met before. Actually, she recognized him. She already knew him. As for the company's history, 20 years ago, Wan Yunming founded the Crane Legion Trading Company, which later became the conglomerate Wan He. It took him just 6 short years to build a trading empire. In business circles, this was incredible and earned him attention and recognition. Yet despite all that luck and power, the attention didn't go to Yunming. It wasn't him people admired. People constantly admired his sons, one of whom we already know, because he had a conflict with the blonde. The center of attention was always him, Wan Zihao, the one who was supposed to inherit the corporation. The golden boy, aristocratic, handsome, refined. People called him different things like choose owner, because it's hard to even describe how popular he was with the girls. As for the younger son, Wang Zijia, it was the opposite. No media presence, his whole life, including himself, was a complete secret. For total security, the company bought up all the photos and videos taken by paparazzi, so hardly anyone even knew what he looked like. So now we know that in his office, Wan Zihao was reading the news about the investigation with the hotel girl being wrapped up. He wasn't happy that it had happened at all, but what could he do? On top of that, someone knocked on his office door, so he hid the tablet. And the guy who walked in, smiling, we already know, was Wang Zijia, his younger brother. As soon as the older brother greeted him, the younger brother asked, right from the doorway, whether the news about the girl's romance was the older brother's doing. Wan Zihao got up from his desk while his brother reminded him that he had organized that meeting. The first time they'd met, they didn't even talk. The older brother stood behind him, put his hands on his shoulders, and said there's no need to pay attention to such silly gossip. Wan Zijia said he didn't care about the news itself. He was more curious why his brother acted that way. Does it mean there are problems in the company? Wan Zihao said his brother was smart, because it was true. There were difficulties, but he'd already handled them, so the younger brother didn't need to worry anymore. Zijia said that if next time his help was needed, the older brother could at least tell him, or give a heads up, because he felt uncomfortable in situations like that. Zihao promised he would, apologized to his brother, and even asked why he was so suddenly worked up. Did he fall in love? Zijia smiled and said he wasn't in love, just had a light crush on a girl, nothing more. The older brother immediately started spinning questions at him, trying to figure out who she was, but the younger didn't give in. Wan Zijia said he met her during an internship, which earned him a lecture from his brother about being sent to study there, and yet, look at him, he found a girl he likes. Wan Zihao said that even if the younger one didn't say her name, he'd still find out. But the guy didn't budge, saying that if he ever said her name, his brother would dig so deep into her biography, he'd reach the medieval times. He said that the girl didn't know who he really was, so once he tells her, he'd introduce them immediately. Zihao said his little bro had gone straight to his heart. He even had secrets from the older brother already. Zijia smiled and said sadly that the man across from him had way more secrets than he did. As soon as the younger brother left, the man called someone, saying he wanted to find out who his brother got close to during the internship. But he ordered it done so secretly that Wan Zijia would never suspect they were doing anything behind his back. Today, Tan Chenxia also had work at the company. She had to visit her boss first. He watched her carefully, like he wanted to eat her up. The girl was ready to leave if he didn't need anything else from her. But the boss suddenly asked how she even knew Bai Jiho, who insisted she work with him personally. She gently dodged the question about whether they'd met before, saying that such things could harm the star's reputation. The boss pressed why Jihu wouldn't want anyone else but her. She couldn't admit he needed her life. So she said he was a good person who probably just wanted support. The boss waved off her refusal to answer and said that the guy was important to them. They needed him not to refuse, because the annual conference was super important and it was coming up soon. The girl almost jumped in her chair when she heard about the conference. The boss said whether they could present the company's face depended entirely on her. The girl realized that this promotion really got her closer to uncovering the truth. Because the annual conference was important, there'd be an unknown man there. After finishing the conversation, she was ready to leave, but remembered she still had a question for her boss. She asked if he'd seen Han Xinqian, the finance director. When he said she'd taken long-term leave, she was super surprised and asked if anyone else had taken leave instead. But no, she'd sent them a letter herself asking for leave. The boss complained a little that someone could suddenly be allowed to take time off like that. The girl thought she probably couldn't have sent the letter herself because she'd disappeared. During the break, the girls at the company all went out for lunch, some to eat, some for coffee. A few girls pointed to the table where Qiangxia was sitting, even if they didn't all know her name. One blonde explained that she was the girl from the scandalous news, because she worked personally for Bai Ji-ho, who apparently requested her himself. Chengxia, by the way, couldn't even eat after hearing this from the boss, picking at her food with chopsticks. She thought about the finance director. Maybe if someone specifically took leave for her, she'd be safe. But she wasn't alone for long because the shadow over the table grew darker. Some girls approached. A few girls greeted her, sat down, and asked why she was alone, why she'd eaten so little. The girl greeted them and smiled. In her mind, she noted they'd come because of the news that she now worked for Bai Ji-ho. Of course, they said she was now an influential figure because she worked with that handsome idol. The girls said they were a little jealous. They'd want to work with him too, but he personally picked her. Naturally, they started asking where, when, and how the girl met him, but she figured it didn't matter. Whatever she said, the gossip would spread anyway. So she made up a story. Since she used to work at a cafe where Bai Ji-ho was supposedly her manager, he understood her situation and decided to care for her and take her as his assistant. The girls were impressed, and most importantly, they believed it and started praising Bai Ji-ho even more. Tiangxia spent the whole lunch break with them. These cheerful girls reminded her of the fun she used to have with Jiame, times that would never come back, which made her sad. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this review, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this story and what manhwa you'd like to see next. See you in the next installment.